has hosted Solar Oregon talking about home solar electricity for a number of years now, because I think it's a very cool and useful technology. As Zach will tell you, but I'll step on his lines a little. The thing about Oregon is if your house, your place, your site is good, then it can be a very worthwhile thing, even here in Oregon. So the main thing you're going to learn tonight is the methods, the technology, the financial details, and I'm curious about those myself because it's always something new every year. So without any further ado, let's move on to Zach Snyder talking about home solar and storage. Over to you, Zach.
Great, thanks, Eric, and welcome everybody. Excited for you to join us, excited to go through our presentation on how to go solar and storage, and just want to say thank you to Eric and to the Tigard Library. This is the second presentation that I've been involved with specifically during my time at Solar Oregon over the past 3 years with Tigard Library, and it's always great to partner with communities like this. And so yeah, that's it's exciting. So I am a program manager, one of 2 program managers at Solar Oregon. We're relatively small, but nonprofit, but we have a pretty outsized impact in the state. I'll get to us in just a second. Here is the agenda of what we're going to go over. This presentation is really geared toward home and business owners who are considering solar and or storage, which we'll talk about, for their home or business, or folks who are just curious about learning more about the technology, incentives, and other details about going solar. So if that describes you, that's great. And if not, hopefully you'll still learn some stuff about solar. We're going to kick off with how solar works. We'll talk briefly about what makes a home or business right for solar. We're talking about the physical characteristics of the site. Then we'll talk a little bit about energy storage, which is a battery that helps you use power when the grid is down, which is a particularly hot topic these days. And then we will wrap up talking about incentives. I'll go over some example budgets for projects, as much as it's possible to talk about such things in detail before you get a quote for your site. And then we'll talk about the installation process for solar. So I'm going to talk about how to put questions in the Q&A, but this is intended to be an interactive workshop. So hopefully we can live up to that. Like I mentioned, Solar Oregon, 40 years old. I've been with Solar Oregon for 3 years. We focus on education and advocacy to increase the adoption of solar and related technologies like energy storage across the state. We do that through presentations like this on how to go solar. We also host solar tours, including our big annual Zero Energy Homes tour in October called the Go Zero Tour, which I would encourage you to check out in the future on our website. We also host campaigns for communities in specific areas, and we always love to tell stories about adopting solar. We are a member-based nonprofit, and so thank you to anybody who's joined who's already a member. I'm going to go ahead and put some links in the chat, and I'm just going to pop all of them in there at once. And that's going to include a link to our website, a link to our events page, a donation link, and other resources that I'll reference. I'll also pop them in towards the end of the presentation. If you want to donate to Solar Oregon, that's greatly appreciated, and that definitely makes a huge impact toward us achieving our mission. This presentation is supported by Energy Trust of Oregon, and Energy Trust of Oregon is an independent nonprofit that provides education, such as this program, as well as incentives and other resources to help folks adopt energy efficiency and renewable energy. And they serve the 1.6 million customers of Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, and the gas utilities in Oregon. And they support this as well as other educational content that Solar Oregon produces. So thank you to Energy Trust of Oregon. And now about the Q&A box in the chat, please feel free to use the chat box. If you don't see your menu, it should be a black bar with buttons on it. You might have to mouse over a certain part of your screen, but as soon as you see it, you'll see chat, you'll see Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, because that will help us stay organized, and I will focus on answering questions at the end of the presentation from the Q&A box first. And finally, I'd love to get to know the audience who's joined a little bit before we start the presentation. And I have a series of polls. I'll also have a poll at the end to get a little bit of feedback from you about this presentation. I'm going to launch the first one here, just asking where you're tuning in from. And so you might see the dialog box right now. And if you just click, there's different sections of the state there. And we can get some feedback here. I'll just give maybe 5 or 10 more seconds here. Looks like most people actually already responded. All right. And we can take a look. And looks like we got some folks from all over, which is very cool. Thank you. I've got another poll that I like to launch. This is a poll asking for demographics. This is fully optional and anonymous, but it helps us to figure out who we're serving in Oregon. Please take a minute and fill that out if you would. All right, I'll give another 5 or 10 seconds here. All right, thank you for that. And then last poll before we get started is asking your familiarity with a couple of the incentives we're going to talk about. And this is just for me to get a sense of where you're starting. So the first one is the standard solar incentive from Energy Trust of Oregon. And this is a yes, no, or you're not sure if you're familiar. And the second one is the solar within reach incentive from Energy Trust of Oregon. So I'll just give a minute for this. All right, just give a couple more seconds because it looks like everybody's very quick on this. And we're at 100%. And I can just share these results out. Looks like we've got a lot of folks, about a split for the standard incentive, and maybe a lot of folks not familiar with solar within reach. I will tell you all about it here today. So thank you so much for your input there. Let's get started. So first thing I'll go over is how solar works, and I am going to show you a diagram of a solar system here. This is a hypothetical house on which solar is installed, and the first place I'll start is up here on the upper left, and you see the solar panel, which is labeled photovoltaic panel. It's another name for a solar panel, and this is very simple. The sunlight strikes the panel, and that produces electricity, it produces a voltage. And this is, that would be as simple as it gets, except that that type of electricity produced by your solar system is in a certain form called DC electricity. And the electricity that you use in your home is AC electricity. So this is reaching back to maybe middle school electronics. If you don't know the difference between DC and AC, don't worry about it. Just know that they're different. And so that's why we have this box called the inverter or microinverter that comes after the solar panel, and that converts from the DC electricity that your solar produces into the AC electricity that your home uses. From there, it gets wired into the home electrical panel. And that is the breaker box that might be in your garage or somewhere else in your home. The electricity enters the breaker box, the electrical panel, and from there flows through all the circuits of your home, powering your lights, your appliances, your electric vehicle charger if you have one. And any excess electricity passes out from the home and goes through your utility meter and onto the utility grid. One thing to note is that when you get solar, you're going to have to swap out your regular utility meter with a bi-directional utility meter. And this is something the utility company will do for you. So you won't have to worry about the details of that. But the reason you have to make that swap is because your regular utility meter only records electricity flowing into your home, because that's how the electrical grid was originally built. But now that you have solar, you need that new meter that measures electricity going both ways. So that's the gist of a solar system. It's pretty basic. There's no moving parts. And that's one of the reasons why solar is so low maintenance. I want to show you what the special box called the inverter, or the boxes called the microinverter, what they do, or what they look like. And an inverter, you can see an example in the left image of the white box on the outside of this home. That's a traditional inverter. On the right, you see the little black boxes that are underneath these solar panels on this ground-mounted solar array. Those are microinverters, and they do the exact same thing. It's just that with an inverter, you'll have one centralized unit. With microinverters, you'll have multiple units that are each plugged into one or two solar panels each. There are systems in which there might be some slight advantage in terms of cost for your system. And so you'll need to choose between inverter and microinverter. And I can't tell you which will be the best for your situation, but that's something your solar contractor can definitely help to walk you through when you have that conversation and you get your solar quote. There are a couple of mounting options for solar. A very popular mounting option is a roof mount, and that's where solar panels get attached to your roof. This can happen on many different types of roof, so you don't have to worry about that. And it has the benefit of using space that otherwise is just open roof space that's protecting you from the elements. The reason it's so popular is because there often isn't space for a ground mount. A ground mount is what you see on the right-hand side of the slide. You'll see that that is something that takes up ground space. There's also potentially an additional cost to a ground mount because you have to trench a line to run a copper wire between the ground mount and your electrical panel. And if your ground mount is super far away from your electrical panel, that can increase the cost actually quite substantially, because copper is very expensive these days, partially due to supply chain issues, though it was never incredibly cheap. And so just so you know, if you're thinking of a ground mount that's super far away, it could be much cheaper to do a roof mount. But these are both great options for solar. I mentioned a couple of slides ago that the electricity, when you have excess solar electricity, that can flow out from your home through your bidirectional meter and go back onto the grid. And the great news is that you can get credit for that electricity that can offset the cost of electricity that you're purchasing maybe at night when you're using power when the sun is down. The system that lets you do that is called net metering. And I'm going to explain the basics of how net metering works. And this is true for Pacific Power, Portland General Electric, and a lot of other small co-op utilities, though not all small co-op utilities. So if you're on a smaller co-op or municipal utility, you might want to double check with them about their net metering agreement. But if you're Pacific Power or Portland General Electric, you are A-OK with net metering. So I'm going to walk you through these two charts. The one on the left shows you a typical summer month, and there's an orange bar and a blue bar. The orange bar is the amount of electricity, say, in this typical summer month, because it's so sunny, of solar energy that you're producing. The blue bar is how much energy you're consuming that month. So you can see that in this average summer month, you're producing more than you're using, and this green arrow is the net gain of your solar system. You get net metering credit earned for that excess that you produce that month. And then let's take a look at the chart on the right. You can see that the amount of solar you use is less than the amount of electricity you consume, and that's that red arrow shows the deficit there. That's electricity that you're going to be buying from the electricity company. However, if you have accrued net metering credits in the summer, you can use those to offset the what you would be buying from the utility company in the winter months. This is a great system, and one important note is that these credits roll over from month to month, but they don't roll over from year to year. However, the net metering year starts on March 1st, which is the beginning of the sunny summer period. And so it's designed very well so that you typically earn all these credits during the sunny summer months, and then you use those to offset your consumption in the winter months. Any excess credits at the end of the net metering year, you do forfeit. So this will come in handy as knowledge when we're talking about system sizing, because you want to meet your energy needs, but not exceed them. That is the gist of how solar works. And obviously the benefit to you, one of the main benefits, is not only are you powered by clean renewable energy, but you save on your energy bills every month, which over time can add up to essentially wealth building. So next, we're going to take a look at what makes your home or business right for solar. And we're thinking here specifically about your site characteristics. So I just mentioned the most important factor that goes into determining your system size, and that's how much electricity you consume, because you want to meet and not exceed your consumption. Because again, if you're producing all these extra kilowatt hours of solar electricity, at the end of the year, you'll forfeit any net credits for the year. Solar contractors are very used to examining your past electrical usage and estimating just the right system size for you, so you don't really have to be worried about doing that calculation on your own. Other factors that can affect how big your solar system include available space on your roof. It might be that you aren't able to offset all of your energy needs. You only have a certain amount of space, but you can still offset a portion, and it's still a great investment for you in the long run to offset that portion. Another constraining factor might be your budget. And so maybe you have plenty of roof space, but you only want to do a partial offset now because that's what you want to pay for now, and you want to add solar panels later. That is something that a number of people do. It's totally viable as a way to kind of stagger your investment in solar. You definitely want to talk to your solar contractor about that and about your desire to do that, because the size of the inverter will typically be matched to the amount of solar that you ultimately intend to install. And so you just want to have that conversation about future expectations with your contractor. And the last note I'll make here is that the size of your system, you'll see it measured in something called kW. And kW is kilowatts. There are a few terms that are very similar in electricity. One is kilowatt hour, and kilowatt in terms of the size of a system is different from kilowatt as an instantaneous rate of electricity. So it gets very confusing. You don't have to worry about that. Just know that we're talking about the size of a system in units of kilowatts, and that the average size is a 6 kilowatt system here in Oregon. I'll reference that when we talk about our example budget. So the next thing I want to talk about is your solar access. This is how much sunshine you have access to on your property. This is a hypothetical home with some solar panels on the roof, and this is a diagram that shows the cardinal directions and the path of the sun in the sky over the house. And because we're in the northern hemisphere here, the sun rises in the east and travels across the southern sky. It's a little bit higher in summer, a little bit lower in winter, but it's always in the southern sky. This means that south-facing roofs are ideal for solar. They work excellent. East and west-facing roofs also work great for solar in Oregon. West-facing just slightly better, but both are workable. The only roof plane that you really don't see solar installed on is north-facing roofs. And occasionally you'll see a solar system where someone will install on the north face roof, but actually tilt it up so it looks like a weird fin on the home. You can choose to do that if you want to. People have differing opinions on whether you want to do that and tilt your panels up like that, but it is technically a workaround. So that's the first thing, is what is the orientation of your roof and your roof space? You also have to look at how much shade, and especially here in Oregon, since we have so many beautiful shade-making objects. You may be surprised at how bad you are at figuring out which trees are problematic or which buildings nearby are problematic when it comes to shading for your solar system. Sometimes you just, you only exit and leave your home at certain times of the day, in the morning and the evening when you're coming back from work or something like that, and you don't see the beautiful sunshine falling in the middle of the day. Or sometimes you think you have plenty of space, but there's that one redwood just to the south of your home that blocks the most crucial hours of sunlight when you're not expecting it. So the moral of the story here is that solar contractors are very skilled at getting on Google Maps, taking a look at your roof and objects nearby, and they can get plenty of information to pre-qualify your home and just figure out how much shading you likely receive and if it's worth them coming out and actually giving you a full quote. Additionally, you want to consider roof complexity. So here are a couple of roofs from Google Maps that I fell in love with. The one on the left is a highly complex roof. You can see it's broken up into many different geometric planes, many of which face south. So you probably could install some solar on this roof, but it's best to have the contiguous space that the roof on the right has, where you can just put panels right next to each other in a nice big array. That reduces the, increases the overall area and reduces the amount of extra labor and conduit run between the different arrays to connect them electrically. And also, and probably most importantly here, is your roof condition. This matters because you are installing something physically on your roof, and roofs do occasionally need to be reinstalled. You need to get a new roof. And when that happens, you really can't postpone it. It's something you got to do. And when you have solar panels on there, you do have to uninstall the solar panels, re-roof, and then put the solar panels back on. And so here's my advice to you. If you are just about to re-roof in the next, 1 to 5 years, I would say definitely wait, re-roof, and then get solar. It'll be better for you. I'd say at a minimum, you want at least 10 years of roof life left. And you can't even take advantage of all the incentives unless you are willing to sign a certificate validating that you have at least 10 years of roof life left. Ideally, a standard asphalt shingle roof like the one pictured here, they have different lifespans. So check the one for your roof, and also get someone to take a look at its condition, just kind of kick their boot against it and see how sturdy it is. The lifetime varies from, maybe 20 to 50 years on those asphalt shingle roofs. Metal roofs last a lot longer. So if you have, this is mostly a consideration for asphalt shingle. If you have standing seam metal, that really is an ideal roof for solar, and condition is much less of a concern. Finally, the structure of your roof internally can have some impact on the overall cost of your system and the timeline on which it can be installed. And that's because there are structural code requirements that you need to meet in order to install solar. And those structural code requirements don't actually have anything to do with protecting your roof from the downward weight of the solar panels. The solar panels don't weigh that much. However, the solar panels sit just a few inches above the roof plane, and in high wind conditions, there's actually an upward lift from the shear force of the wind, which is interesting. And that's just the technical detail. What this really means is that your roof falls into most likely one of two categories. On the left, you'll see an image of a roof structure that is uses trusses, and that is where you see these horizontal and vertical support beams. And in this image, you can also see the metal brackets that connect the support beams to the main rafters that parallel the roof line. And if you see those brackets especially, that means you have prefabricated trusses, and you will pass any structural code requirement with flying colors, and you won't have to worry about it. With rafters, you fall into one of two categories with rafters. Your rafters, the main concern is that your rafters don't span too far. If they span too far, that's when you start to have to get a structural engineer to take a look at it. And the structural engineer might slow the process down and cost, $700 to $1,000. And that's something that'll go into the cost of your solar system. If the engineer takes a look at it and the span is just too far to meet structural code requirements, they will suggest certain reinforcements for your roof. Sometimes they're as simple as something called sistering, where they'll take another 2x4, put it right next to your rafter, and just screw it in 5 different places to the rafter. And it's not very invasive, but it does require the material and labor costs, so that does add a tiny bit to the solar system cost as well. However, there are some homes with rafter roofs that don't have a span that's too wide, and in that case, your solar contractor would be able to determine that before you have to consider hiring an engineer, which is something that the solar contractor will manage for you anyway. So something to keep in mind in terms of your roof structure. So that is how your site characteristics of your home or business might affect your prospects for going solar. Let's talk now a bit about solar and storage. As I mentioned, this is a hot topic. And really, the reason we are focused on this is consider the situation where you are someone who experiences a lot of power outages. And that can fall into a few different categories. There could be short outages. Maybe there's a long outage you want to protect against. Solar plus storage, and storage, again, is a battery for your home or business, gives you the ability to a certain extent to protect against outages. And I'll talk a little bit about how effective it is and how to determine that. But it is pretty much the best technology combination that there is. It's like peanut butter and jelly, solar and storage. And so why think about energy resilience? And energy resilience is just that ability to use power when the grid is down. There are different causes for outages. The main brief outages are caused by storms and squirrels. Squirrels love to nibble on the cables, and storms love to take down trees and crash your local power line. That happens to everyone everywhere, especially when you're a little bit farther out from the main urban center. There are also things called public safety power shutoffs. And that is the idea that if you followed some of the news in 2019, 2020, fires down in California caused by trees that had grown next to the utility grid, and that creating a fire danger in high wind, high temperature conditions. And so during those conditions, the utility company considers turning off whole sections of their grid for up to several days sometimes. And that, of course, can be a huge hassle and just safety hazard for folks. And we had our first public safety power shutoff in Oregon during the devastating 2020 fire season. This won't affect everyone everywhere. And in particular, I've heard of risk mostly in Hood River County so far, but it is something to keep in mind. Also, there are cyber security risks. The grid is a centralized power generation technology that we built decades ago, and solar and storage makes it distributed. So you are kind of taking control of your own energy and disconnecting from maybe the fragile centralized grid. Finally, the Cascadia seismic zone. We're all waiting for the big one, the big earthquake, and estimates are that electrical power on the Oregon coast, for example, might go out for 6 months. In the Willamette Valley, that might be for 6 weeks. But regardless, that's a long time to have your power go off. So just something that some people are thinking, how can we plan for that in terms of how we consider novel energy technologies? So let's talk about solar and storage. And really what I'm talking about here, you can see an image of a battery on the left, in this case, in the garage of a home, and solar, obviously, on the rooftop, and those being connected electrically. Just so you know, there are a number of battery options on the market. A lot of people have heard about Tesla Powerwall because they have a lot of name recognition. However, when you talk to a contractor, they may install one or another battery. You can get multiple quotes from multiple contractors and talk to people about what batteries they prefer. But here are just some options, none of which I can recommend in particular because we're an impartial nonprofit, but just to show you some examples. And this slide just emphasizes the fact I really want to set your expectations about what a battery can do. Some people have the conception that you get one battery and then you can have your backyard concerts and your jacuzzi running, jacuzzi parties. And that is wildly unrealistic because some appliances use an incredible amount of energy. So you have to be strategic. And one way to be strategic is considering a partial home backup, which is what you'll be considering if you consider one battery almost certainly. Some people get multiple batteries and that allows them to back up all the circuits in their home. But most people do a partial home backup. And so I want to talk about that for a second. This is just what it looks like to have multiple batteries, just so you know that that's an option. When you are considering energy storage, you're going to ask yourself 2 questions, and this is going to be a conversation that you have with your solar contractor. What needs power when there's an outage, and for how long? And it's a balance between those 2 things. And so, like I mentioned, there's things like jacuzzis, which are a lot of fun, but they use a ton of energy, and they are probably not necessary when you have an outage. What is typical is that people will power only their essentials. A refrigerator to keep food from spoiling seems really important. Some lights in the common areas, in the kitchen maybe, and in the bedroom, as well as some outlets so that you can charge a computer, a cell phone, maintain your communications with loved ones, things like that. Other things like a TV, you can just have that conversation with your solar contractor and figure out what's feasible. But you'll have to balance that with the length, the duration of your ability to use power during an outage. To give you a couple of examples on maybe the extremes of the spectrum, you might, have a system where you're planning on only trying to use power during the short 2 to 3 typical hour, 2 to 3 hour power outages. That's where there's a storm or a squirrel, something like that. And you might be able to get away with adding the extra, like the space heater or something, potentially onto your list of what you can power. If you really want to go for a longer 1-2 day is mostly feasible. You could technically go maybe up to like a week, 10 days, but that really requires a large investment and increasing the number of batteries that you're investing in. But that's kind of the range of the spectrum there. And most people go for just the simple few hours, maybe up to like 6 hours, 8 hours kind of protection. And the way you perform a partial home backup is like this. If you're wondering how you carve up the circuits in your home, it's actually already done for you in your electrical panel. Each of the circuits is connected to a breaker. So you probably have experience using that in your own home. And what you do when you create a partial home backup is you'll look at your electrical panel, you'll pick, I want this breaker, this breaker, this breaker, and this breaker. And the solar contractor will take those breakers and put them into this new second breaker panel for you. That's called an essential loads panel, and attach that breaker panel to your new battery. And when there's an outage, only those breakers will receive power, and the main electrical panel will still go out of power during the outage. So that is solar plus storage. Let's get into the financial side of the equation and talk about incentives and costs. So solar costs, and this is a chart of average solar costs over roughly the past decade, though it's a couple of years out of date at this point. But the main point here is that there is a trend of prices falling down and that kind of leveling off over time. So prices really decreased in the 2010 to 2015 range. And now they're still decreasing because there are technological improvements. There's improvements in the supply chain as the industry grows. And you do see those price reductions. They're just not on the mammoth scale that they were in the early part of the 2010s. But still, prices have come down a lot in the past decade. So if you haven't thought about solar in the past decade, know that there's been a change there. And there are a few really great incentives to help you make that investment for yourself. One of them is the solar investment tax credit, and that is a federal incentive. Another is a state incentive called the solar and storage rebate. And then there are incentives provided by Energy Trust of Oregon. Everyone in the state of Oregon can take advantage of the first two. Energy Trust of Oregon incentives are only available to customers of Pacific Power and Portland General Electric, which fortunately is most folks in the state, but you want to double check that. Here are the rates. The solar investment tax credit, though it technically for the rest of this year is at 26%, I am showing you the new rate for 2023 because you only get to claim that tax credit based on the date of the full installation and interconnection of your system. And at this point, it's unlikely that you will be fully installed if you signed a contract today with a solar installer. Maybe it's possible, but most likely you'll have the 22% investment tax credit rate. Just a note about the solar investment tax credit. There are ads saying that this is the last year to take advantage of it. It's not quite true. It's just going down from 26 to 22% next year. After that, it's scheduled to go away completely. And so that's where that drop off is. Fortunately, you should have plenty of time if you want to install solar next year. And there is a bill in the Congress right now that's being considered that might extend the tax credit beyond that. And that is by no means something you should rely on because it has not been signed into law. But know that this incentive has been renewed periodically over the past 10 or 12 years. And so that is a possibility. The state rebate is up to $5,000 for solar and an additional up to $2,500, $2,500 for energy storage if that battery is connected to a solar system. And finally, the Energy Trust standard incentive is $600. However, Energy Trust of Oregon also has a really impactful incentive called Solar Within Reach. This is the one I asked you about in the poll at the beginning of the webinar. And this is based on your household income. If you're below a certain pretty generous income threshold, you have the ability to take advantage of this. If you're above that threshold, you don't. But to give you an example, the threshold for a household of 4 is currently $112,860 for the household income. So if you fall below that, you get to take advantage of this incentive. Pacific Power customers, that's up to $6,000. It is based on the size of the system, but if you have an average size system, you will max it out. And so that's $6,000, and PGE, if you're a PGE customer, it's up to $8,400. So very large incentive and a great thing to take advantage of. Just a couple of notes about the state rebate. Like I mentioned, up to 5,000 for solar, up to 2,500 for storage. That's also based on the size of your system, and the dollar per watt rate of the incentive varies from 20 cents per watt to $1.80 per watt, depending on a few things. If you're a non-income qualifying customer of one of the main utilities, it's going to be that lower rate of 20 cents per watt. And you might expect, to only take advantage of a portion of this incentive. And I'll walk through that on the next couple slides here. So I'm going to walk through an example budget of the average size 6 kilowatt system for a system in PGE first, and then I'll talk about Pacific Power. I'm going to talk with you about the total cost, and then after each of these incentives, what it costs, and then what the net cost is of a system. Please take this budget with a grain of salt. Your system will certainly be a different cost. There are many factors that go into the pricing of a solar system, including very significantly the system size. And like I mentioned, system sizes vary dramatically. But we're estimating here an upfront cost for a 6 kilowatt system being $20,000. And the great news is that your solar contractor handles all the paperwork and applies for 2 of the main incentives on your behalf, and then passes that savings directly onto you. And so you don't have to worry about the hassle of that. They apply for energy trust incentive, which is here. Sorry about that. This is supposed to say 600, not 1,200 for this main. That's a typo. But if you're in PGE and you are below that income threshold and you can take advantage of solar within reach, again, that is $8,400 that you have. So the net cost here, and it's a little bit of a typo here, but just propagate that $600 all the way down. So roughly $18,000 or $19,000, excuse me, for if you don't have advantage of the solar within reach, or about 11,000, 12,000 if you do. Again, that's your installer that gets that. And then the installer also gets for you the state rebate. That's what this ODO rebate is. If you are meet the income thresholds there, which are different from the Energy Trust income thresholds. They're a little bit lower, so you may not meet them. But if you do, it's 5,000. If you don't, it's about 1,200 in this scenario. This takes you down to the out-of-pocket cost is roughly 18 grand. If you don't meet those income qualifications, or if you exceed them, and if you do fall in those brackets, it's 6,600. So that makes a huge difference there. Then that's the cost that you pay out of pocket. You apply for the federal tax credit on your own, maybe with your tax advisor the following year when you do your taxes. And so this is not immediate. And there is a tiny bit of work that you have to do there. But after you apply that, the final cost you can see in the last row here. And so you can see the incentives can make a really dramatic difference for you on your solar cost. This is for PG&E. I'm not going to walk through all these same steps for Pacific Power, but you can see that we start with the same 6 kilowatt, $20,000 assumption to begin with. The out-of-pocket cost to the customer is roughly the same. It's about 18,000 for non-income qualifying. For income qualifying, it's about 9,000, and then you drop that down to the 14,000 versus 7,000. Hopefully, that gives you a very general ballpark estimate of what a system could cost, just to set your expectations a little bit. So I'm going to end here before we get to our Q&A on how do you get started, what does the installation process look like, and how can you take your next steps to get solar if you are ready for that. First thing I want to point out is that Energy Trust of Oregon, beyond providing these great incentives, also rigorously qualifies and ranks solar contractors. They give them a star rating that you can look up. These qualified contractors are called trade allies of Energy Trust of Oregon. And note that you will not be able to take advantage of any of the Energy Trust incentives unless you use a Trade Ally installer. The good news is that virtually all of them are trade allies of Energy Trust here in Oregon, at least the biggest and most reputable ones. I'm going to go ahead and in the chat, just to put it back in front of you, the set of links that I dropped earlier in the chat, and this includes the second or third from the bottom, Energy Trust Solar Bid Tool, and you can save that link. That leads to this really great tool that Energy Trust of Oregon provides. That's an online form. It takes maybe 3 to 5 minutes to fill it out. You give your address, your contact information, and what they do is they automatically select 3 of the most highly rated contractors that serve your zip code and send your information to them. They have to get in touch with you within a couple of days and offer you a free quote. And so it's a great way to just get in touch with 3 contractors that you know do high quality work and get quotes for them for free. So I highly suggest that as a tool. You can also, of course, get quotes from other installers that you like the look of if you are searching on Google. And finally, the installation process. The contractor, contractors offer a turnkey service. And so this is something where once you've decided it's time for me, I'm ready to go solar, you sign a solar contract. Sometimes there might be an upfront partial payment, but then the rest of the payments at the end. But the solar contractor handles all the details in between. And that includes applying for incentives, applying for your electrical and structural permits, and then getting you on their construction calendar, doing the installation. After the installation itself just takes, on average for a typical residential system, you might get it done in a single day, maybe 2 days. So it's pretty painless. They're mostly on your roof and then a little bit around your electrical panel. It's not super invasive. And then after the installation, there is a short period where the contractor will manage all of the inspections to close out your permits, as well as schedule the installation of your bidirectional utility meter with your utility, and then with your utility also schedule and complete your interconnection to the grid. That's where you're powering on. Once they do that and they power on your system, you have clean, renewable solar energy powering your home. And that just kind of runs in the background, and you can check it on your monitoring app or on the monitoring web portal and see how much electricity your system is producing moment by moment. And it's a great feeling. Overall, the installation timeline from when you sign a contract to when you power on, you should expect that it will take probably at least a couple of months. If there are significant permitting delays, especially if you need a structural engineer to take a look at your roof, then that can add several months, particularly within Portland city limits, though that does vary. So just check in with your contractor and verify to make sure you're setting your own expectations and not being disappointed in that way. It's not something that the contractors can really control, unfortunately. And that is our presentation of how to go solar and storage. And so I'm gonna switch over to Q&A here, and excited to answer all the questions. And I just wanna say thank you again to everybody who joined, and also thank you again to Eric for hosting us here at the Tigard Library. It's been really great.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Looks like we had good attendance and some good questions in the Q&A. It's about 6:50, but we can go a bit past 7 when the library doesn't actually close till 8. So take your time answering the questions thoroughly, and let's go with that.
Great. Yeah, Q&A is one of my favorite parts. So if you haven't put your question in, feel free to start typing that in now, and we'll keep going on a rolling basis. The first question from Carol is this program recorded? That's an excellent question. Yes, we are recording. And in fact, a lot of Solar Oregon's webinars are recorded, and you can search for Solar Oregon on YouTube. We'll also be sending out this recording in the follow-up email to everybody who joined and to everybody who registered for this webinar, so you should see that. And please feel free to share too. Paula asks, can you provide any data or comparisons on the price and performance of the different batteries? That's a great question. I certainly can't give a recommendation because we are brand agnostic when it comes to both installers and the products they're installing technically. However, I can give you some general ideas. There is a range in terms of the price of batteries. And that partially has to do just with the brand and also partially has to do with the capacity of the battery. So make sure you're paying attention to both of those things. In terms of ways in which you should make your decision, I would say, some solar contractors, like I mentioned, will install just one brand of battery. Make sure you're, comparing a couple of quotes. Ask how long they've been installing the battery. Ask how they like the battery they install. Hopefully they should tell you good things and obviously, get multiple opinions. That's about as much as I can tell you. Just note that the longer your contractor has been working with the specific battery they're installing, the better. I would use that as a good metric. If someone says, oh, we just started installing this week, it's not that's, necessarily, gonna produce anything that's suboptimal, but contractors are just now starting to work on a large scale with batteries, and some folks have been doing it for some years, and so they've really dialed in their process a little bit more. Sparkle asks, can you charge your EV? And of course, there are, just to give an overview of electric vehicle charging at home, and this is something that people often think of solar and electric vehicles, and they do go great together. Obviously, you can ride on sunshine. There are a couple of options with EVs. One is just the standard wall outlet, and that's the 110 volts, and you just plug it in like it's a vacuum cleaner or something. That takes a while to charge. And so most people go one level up, which is the level 2 charger, and that is 220 volts. That's the same amount of voltage as like a washer and dryer or a jacuzzi might use. And so typically an electrician will need to be involved in installing that charger for you, though that does allow you to charge in just 2 to 4 hours kind of thing, depending on the car and the charger. And that's always a great option. So David asks, I have a 6.3 kilowatt PV array on my roof that was installed in 2015. I accessed the federal, state tax credits and rebate and the Energy Trust of Oregon incentive for that install. What would be available to me if I just add battery storage at this point? That is an excellent question. So this is also implicit in that question is, can you add batteries to a solar system after the solar system has been installed? And the answer to that is yes. And if you want to look on our YouTube, we actually did this past Earth Day, a deep dive on energy storage, where we talked more about the technical details of energy storage systems. I won't get into the technical details too much. There's two different flavors of battery system. One is AC coupled, one is DC coupled, and you would be looking at an AC coupled system, and you can look at our past webinar if you want to learn what that is. And it's totally viable in terms of incentive and what you would get for it. The state rebate, the $2,500 up to $2,500 would apply as long as that battery system is being installed with a solar system, which in your case is. The federal tax credit, many people do claim a battery. However, the rules on that falls into tax law, and I really can't give you tax advice because that's over my head, and I don't want to give you bad advice there. Just know that there's a variety of interpretations and the courts have the final say. So that's that. Paula asks, can you get the federal solar tax credit for batteries? This is the same question, basically. If you DIY, so do your own battery, rather than using an installer. For reference, I installed PV last year with a certified installer, but I want to DIY my batteries this year. Another great question, and I would unfortunately have to give you the same answer that I'm not a tax professional. And in terms of those detailed questions, I would talk to a tax professional even before I would trust the word of a solar installer, because people have different opinions on this. And when it comes to doing your taxes, I would say do them the right way and maybe talk to a tax professional. Anonymous asks, can storage batteries be installed in a crawl space? That's a good question. That's a good question. You may find something in the National Electrical Code that would prevent that, because you typically for electrical equipment you need to have good access to it, and a crawl space might be determined to be not good access, so it may be against National Electrical Code. However, that's speculative, and the folks over at Mayfield Renewables, who deal a lot with storage technology, and actually are folks who educate a lot of the installers in the state on the code requirements for installing storage, might be the right folks to ask. That's Mayfield Renewables, and maybe they'll give you a good answer. Unfortunately, I'm not able to tell you myself. Anonymous asks, are there any statewide policies that preclude an HOA from blocking the installation of PV? So homeowners associations sometimes don't like solar, and I'm not sure why. I think sometimes it's just an aesthetics argument, and HOAs often have an element of visual conformity of homes, which folks, that's why people choose HOAs. There is a law that says an HOA can't de facto preclude the installation of a PV system. However, they can make it difficult enough that you don't really want to do it. And if you are interacting with your HOA and you are looking for tips, talking to them, I would say definitely talk to them about it. Maybe you won't get anywhere. Feel free to email me, and we sometimes help people talk to their HOAs if we have capacity. No promises. Michelle asks, will you email the links that are in the chat? And I can certainly include that in the follow-up email. And thank you for asking that. And that hopefully will be useful for you. Anonymous, can a condo HOA install PV on garage units owned by the HOA, or could an individual pay for the solar, take the tax credits, and own the units on a garage roof? This really gets into a matter of ownership, and I think that the HOA would certainly be able to not allow you to do that. So it might be that if you had the opportunity to do that, it would be by their good graces. It depends. Yeah, if they own it, they decide. And also an important detail here is, where is the electrical panel to which the solar system is being wired? Because if that electrical panel just serves the garage of the HOA, that won't impact your utility bill. You might have to run a conduit all the way to your utility meter, or your meter and your panel. Just so you know, there might be a technical reason why that wouldn't work too, but best of luck to you. Anonymous asks, are there reasonable options that pay the installation cost in exchange for a lower electric rate? And what you're thinking of most likely is a solar lease, and there are options. Often companies will offer solar leasing as an option. That basically works where they cover the upfront cost, and then they give you some of the energy savings value, but not all of it, and they recoup the rest of that value. And it's a way to avoid having to pay the upfront cost of the system. In terms of reasonable options, there are, I believe. However, I'm not quite up to date with that market because it's a smaller part of the market, and I don't keep quite as close tabs on it as a regular ownership market. There was historically a bit of a gaffe where there was a company who came in and offered a bunch of solar leases, and then exited the state right after they installed those systems. And then they basically passed on all those systems to other installation companies here. And it became a little bit of a fiasco that gave solar leasing a bad rap. However, I don't think it's a bad option in general, but I would say look into the company, regardless, look into the company to see how long they've been doing business. And if you know they're reputable, long-lived, especially local contractor, I would say that a solar lease could be a great option. Carol asks, and I love all these questions, so thank you for everybody who's putting a question in here. Carol asks, how is financing done? That's a great question. There are credit unions and banks that offer financing packages specific for solar. And the main mechanism, the reason it's a solar financing option and not just some other random financing product, is that you have the ability to recoup 22% of the value of the system on your tax credit. And so there are credit unions that will offer solar financing where you can refinance the system and readjust the rates after you've recouped that and pay that value back on the loan that you receive from the investment tax credit the year following your installation. And they just have that built into the product. That's the gist of it. And I can't give specific recommendations, but you can certainly look up solar financing options and talk to solar contractors because they will certainly be able to point you in the right direction. Catherine asks, great presentation. Is the slideshow available? Yes, the recording first off will be sent out, as I mentioned, and we can also include the slides. However, we don't have detailed notes on them in terms of speaker points, and so you might appreciate the recording more. But I can include the slideshow in the email out. Chris asks, how many square feet of roof space are required per kilowatt? And this is an excellent question for an SAT or ACT test somewhere for some poor high school student. I wish that I had that factoid at the top of mind. I believe that it's about 100. Well, I can't really say off the top of my head. I don't want to take up the time to do the math. But just for reference, there are codes called solar ready codes that kind of set the standard for the minimum amount of roof area that you would want to consider being oriented toward the sun and appropriate for solar when you're building a new home. And that's, that doesn't answer your question, but does kind of tell you what you might take as a reference for the minimum amount of roof area is about, I believe it's, actually, I can't remember off the top of my head either. I'm just gonna fail on this question. I'm gonna phone a friend and pass, but I might look that up and include that also in the email to y'all. Sorry about that. David, will the links in the chat be included in the follow-up email? Yes, we already answered that. Frederick, is it likely that other power providers, for example, Consumers Power, which is a co-op, would eventually join the Energy Trust Incentives Program? That's a great question, and the answer is no, and that really just has to do with the way that utilities are classified and in terms of how they're grouped together legally and structurally, and the fact that Energy Trust of Oregon specifically was developed to serve the main investor-owned utilities in the state. So I really don't see that happening. There's pretty different legal and regulatory context for those smaller consumer-owned utilities? Great question, though. Catherine, do you have any feedback on Tesla solar roof system? This is the roof that is the solar panel itself. And yeah, I do have some feedback on Tesla solar roof systems generally, though I can't speak specifically, and that technology does continue to evolve. The first thing I would say is that we have a webinar recorded from, I think, 2020 that we talked about it, which is at this point pretty woefully out of date for considering how fast the technology moves. But you can get a general overview by watching that recording on our YouTube. Tesla solar roofs have, I think they hold promise in ways. However, the vast majority of systems being installed are solar panels installed on your existing roof currently. And I would say if you're thinking about solar and you want to consider Tesla solar roof, look into it in detail and maybe contact the small handful of folks in the state who currently have a Tesla solar roof system, and if you can find them, and see what they think of it. Anonymous asks, how do you estimate the extra amount of electricity needed for an induction stove or heat pumps or EV? This is a great question, because when you install solar, your solar contractor will estimate your future electrical consumption based on your past utility bills. And your past usage may not reflect your future usage if you're getting additional electrical equipment, like switching from a gas to an induction stove, or from a gas furnace to a heat pump, or you're installing an EV, which of course requires a lot of electricity. So definitely tell that to your contractor when you are talking with them. They'll factor that in. And yes, the way they estimate that extra amount of electricity is looking at the electrical needs, which are part of the specifications of the equipment that you expect to install. So if you know the specific model of those appliances that you're installing, that will help them. But they can also ballpark it, and then they just, they have certain, standard usage levels for those equipment. So if you're like a chef and you run a home cooking show and you're cooking like 16 hours a day, that's different from being like a standard user. And I would tell them that, but other than that, it's pretty easy for them to estimate. Eric, we have some great questions here, but I do want to check in. It is 7 minutes past. Do you want me to keep going, or?
We have 4 left. I think we're good to answer those.
Okay.
Go ahead on.
Great. Mark asks, storage cost, 6 kilowatt typical system, a number of years to pay back, expected lifetime. These are great questions, and I will hit a couple of key points here. One is that, I showed an example budget for a 6 kilowatt solar system. The size of your energy storage system has some to do, but little to do with the size of your solar system. And so first off, the size where you get 1 or 2 batteries has a huge impact on the cost. It doesn't quite double it to go from 1 to 2, because you do save a little bit with the scale, but it does add some extra thousands of dollars. And storage is not cheap. I can't give you really great, reliable cost estimate, because there are a number of products on the market. Their costs are changing rapidly. I do want to set up an example budget for storage here soon, and so maybe check back on a future webinar, but we're just not quite there yet as things are settling in the market. Expected lifetime, that's also a great question, which is a little bit experimental because there are so many new products, and one of the ways in which you measure the expected lifetime of a product is from history, and we just don't have that history yet. Though, of course, there are estimates based on the technical testing and things like that. Number of years to pay back. This is a really critical thing I can give really great information on. Your storage system, your battery, will not pay itself back because we don't have time of use electrical rates. Time of use rate, right now you pay the same amount for a kilowatt at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., 5 p.m., and midnight. Whereas in a time of use rate structure, when the grid is most heavily strained, electricity will cost more to incentivize people not to use electricity. They have that in places, certain places across the United States, around the world, but we just don't have that in Oregon. And I don't think that it's imminent that we will have that. So there are some great programs that are kind of pilot programs that give you some money back for your battery, but I wouldn't, we're not really at the point where I would consider, payback period even with those. So hopefully that's helpful. Paula says, thank you. Thank you, Paula. David, solar lease companies have very complicated paperwork, which is worded, which often is worded in a way that benefits them greatly and can leave the homeowner in a very bad financial situation. Please have a qualified lawyer review the paperwork before signing. Yeah, anytime you're entering any legal contract, that's certainly, an opportunity. I would say that there's certainly is a solar lease market, and I've certainly met people who love their solar lease, though there have been certain gaps in the solar lease market too. Regardless, I would take a look at the integrity of the company as a whole as my main metric for whether something looks interesting or not. And last question, Carolyn asks, what is the best website for evaluating the solar potential of a specific roof? There are great resources. Google provides one. And I actually would hesitate. I don't use those tools too much, partially because the way a contractor works, they'll have their tools that they use, and a contractor really is the best way to estimate your solar potential. You can get a quick look on Google, solar roof tool, things like that. There are also professional grade software packages that some installers use to do that. And but those are paid, and they're really geared toward contractors who are willing to pay those licensing prices. Some contractors won't even use any software at all to evaluate the solar potential of your roof, and they'll just get up on your roof with a special device called a sun eye that will measure the amount of open sky from different points on your roof, and so you can get around the whole software thing if that's how you do it as a company. I would say that I would just leave it to a contractor unless you're really curious, in which case it's mostly an educational opportunity. So thank you for the awesome round of questions. I really enjoyed that, and I hope that you guys did too. And thank you everyone who joined, and thank you again to Eric. This has been a lot of fun.
You're welcome. It's been a good presentation. I hope people have learned something useful from it, at least one or two useful things. I know I have. So that's about it. And you will include me in the email that's sending out the links to, please, because I'm still personally interested.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear what you do.
Okay. Yeah. I guess that's about it then.
All right. We'll close up. Thanks so much, Eric, and everybody for joining.
Have a better one.
Take care.